All right, so we're going to compare Garmin Pilot 9.3.3 to Foreflight version 10.0.2. I'm going to start off in Foreflight. I'm not claiming that I am an expert at either one of these programs. I do use Foreflight more than I use Garmin Pilot. However, Garmin Pilot has recently come out with some of the things that I think needed to be done. So it's a much more capable app than it was even a year ago, but it still has some things that it can still improve on. So I'm going to try to approach this from the perspective of actually flying in the cockpit, not so much just looking feature to feature. Some of the things that I'm not going to cover are like weight and balance and those kind of things. They work pretty well in both applications, checklists, those kind of things. We're not really going to get into that. We're going to try to stick to the main part of actual flying. So in Foreflight, if you click up here in the top left corner, you can choose from the different maps that you want to look at. I'm going to turn off the street view. So when we go up here to the top, we have the aeronautical chart, which is Foreflight's custom chart that they actually have come out with. Or I can select, in my case in Foreflight, I'm actually interfacing with Jeppesen. So I have Jeppesen here. I don't have it on in Garmin Pilot because Jeppesen doesn't allow you to put it in two apps at the same time. So the things that I'm going to be comparing, I'm going to try to stick to the custom maps because the main maps are fairly common between the two. So right now, I am zoomed into an area of close to Atlanta. So you can see I've got a flight plan here from 62 Golf Alpha to KOPN, which is Thomaston Airport. I'm mainly only bringing that up because, as you can see here, you've got Macon down here in the bottom right-hand corner, and then the area, because we're going to try to zoom in on the same area on both apps. So we're going to jump back over here to Garmin Pilot. We're going to click on Home, go back to Map, and we're going to try to get a similar map so you can see the Macon Airport there in the bottom. And so right now I am viewing the VFR chart inside of Garmin Pilot. You can see it's a much cleaner looking interface. I will say though that when I'm flying, it is harder to see Garmin Pilot. It's harder to see the map and stuff than it is in Foreflight. So the colors, although they look really cool, when you're here looking at them, they do present a little bit of a problem in the cockpit on a bright day. So I'm going to jump back over here to Foreflight. Now, you'll notice in Foreflight I have waypoints showing up and a little bit of IFR data. I've got, my Victor Airways are showing up and some of the other data that you normally wouldn't see on a VFR chart. Now, I do have the ability, I can go up here to the settings and I can turn some of that stuff off if I don't want to see airways or airspace or some of the other things. I can turn that off. But by default, or actually in my map, I've got it turned on. Now, you'll also notice that even though I do have that information on, for example, the Macon VOR, you see the little dash symbols around here to show that there is a VOR in the center of the screen, but you can't read the frequency. Foreflight has a pretty bad problem with putting airport names over the top of other labels, so you can't really read what you're trying to read. You'll also notice that the 2,900-foot top on that airspace, you can barely read that, and even down in Warner Robins area, you can't read it at all. So there are some problems with some of this chart in Foreflight. Now, this is a fairly new feature to them, so it's not, I don't expect it to be perfect, but that's something that I think they definitely need to improve on. If we jump back over here to Garmin, you'll notice that you don't have any of the VOR information on here, and that's because I'm viewing strictly the VFR map. So to compare that, I would actually need to come over here and swap this over to the IFR map. And for me, using Garmin Pilot, the IFR map is a bit busy, and I think some of it comes to these big boxes where they name the airspace. I mean the airways. It's a little big and clumsy to me to deal with that. But you'll also notice that down here around this VOR, it's a lot clearer on the Garmin map that there is a VFR. I mean a radio there, VOR sitting there. But again, I don't have frequencies. So now in Garmin Pilot, it's very simple. You just tap the airport name, hit the VOR symbol, and there's your frequency and information that you'd want to have on that particular VOR. So it's fairly simple to get to. If we jump back over here to Foreflight and do something similar, there's two things on Foreflight. One is I can tap. By default, when I tap, it's going to give me information about the airport that I just tapped on. But you'll notice the VOR is right there under it, so I can't really get to it. If I wanted to get information on the VOR, I'd actually tap and hold, and then I got down here at the bottom, you've got your, actually if I go to nav, I've got my making VOR right here with the frequency. So it's not, unusable, it's not, that much of a big deal. I will say that when flying, especially when you're having a problem and you're kind of stressed out or the wind's blowing and it's bumpy, it can get a little difficult to hit exactly what you're trying to hit. So, being able to push and touch is a little bit easier way to get to that information. But even then, I've still got some more clicks that I've got to go through to get to all the details that I need on that particular fix. So, if I go back over here to Garmin Pilot, if I push and hold on this, it really doesn't care if I push and hold or tap. They both work. So it's, to me, Garmin Pilot wins out in this particular aspect of the process, just because I really like this little radial that they bring up, because I can get to the specific information visually without having to, hunt for it in the little pop-up menus that you get in Foreflight. The map in Garmin Pilot is a lot cleaner to me. They've done a really good job of displaying stuff, but you'll notice that as I zoom out on the screen, it is getting more and more detail on the map. If we jump over here to Foreflight as an example, when I zoom out on Foreflight, and you have to zoom out a good bit, but you'll start to notice that it is actually cleaning itself up, not getting more complicated. And so the farther out I zoom, the less and less detail that I've got in the map, which to me makes total sense, because if I'm gonna zoom out and get so many labels on the control that I can't read anything, there's not a whole lot of point. So I think that Foreflight has the better direction in the map clarity in that respect, because you can get Garmin Pilot. I mean, and having said that, at some point, I believe, like when you get to a certain point, Garmin Pilot starts to clean up as well. But they do have a rather cloudy, I mean, this view of their map is completely unusable. There's just way too much information here. So, I think Foreflight does a little bit better job of presenting this stuff. Now you'll also notice that as I zoom in and get it a little bit cleaner, I've got all of my waypoint names and stuff that show up in Garmin Pilot. If I go back over here to Foreflight, you'll notice some of them do show when I zoom in enough, but they clean up here pretty quick. So, right now we've got Macon and Atlanta showing on the screen, and there's no names on any of the waypoints, where if we go over here, I've got Macon and Atlanta showing, and we've still got some of the names, or most of the names, showing up. Again, it's kind of a personal opinion, I guess, but at some point you're going to get to a point where there's so much stuff on the screen that it's hard to read what you're looking for in the first place. So I'm kind of on the fence as to which one of them I prefer. I do think that Garmin, or the Foreflight stuff, is a lot cleaner view to look at, but there's just something about the Garmin Pilot app, the user interface, that I really like. Now, if I'm flying along and I need the nearest airport, Let's say we've got an emergency, I need to find the nearest airport. In Garmin Pilot, you just hit nearest, and it brings up and highlights the nearest airports that are in your area to help you find where you want to go. It also gives you direction of flight so that you can go ahead and start turning that direction, and gives you, easily accessed information that shows you your course to that particular airport. So I can actually flip through and see, based on my route of flight, which one of these things I'd like to go to. So I really like that part of Garmin Pilot. Now, if we jump back over here to Foreflight and attempt to do the same thing, you'll actually notice there is no nearest function in here. In order to get to nearest airports in Foreflight, and this is something that I don't really like, especially I fly a twin-engine airplane. I have had to shut an engine down before. Trying to fly the airplane and deal with this is a little bit more problematic than I would like for it to be. But in order to get to nearest airports in Foreflight, I actually have to, right now you see the blue dot, that's because I'm not moving. If I was moving, there'd be a little airplane there. But I have to push and hold on that blue dot and then release, and it comes up with this screen, this little pop-up. Then I have to go over here to airports, and now I've got a list down here at the bottom of the nearby airports to me. The problem here, and there actually may be a setting that I can turn off the private airports, but one is that most of these airports are private airports. In fact, pretty much every single one of these that it brought up are private airports. It did not bring up any of the big airports that are around my area. So if I wanted to land at a paved strip, this is bringing me up, things that aren't really relevant. In addition, if I click on more, I can go down here to details, and kind of see what I've got available. I can go to info. If I go back, I'm back over here at my list. So I can kind of go down and pick a different airport. But to me, the Foreflight nearest function is not nearly as easy and fluid as it should be. I feel like there's too many steps to getting to that information, where Garmin Pilot is just one touch, and then there's a list of my airports, and I can easily see where they're at, and all the other complexities are hidden from me. So I think Garmin Pilot does a little better job on the nearest function. Now, if I wanted to know, let's say we wanted to do something with our flight plan. So we're going to come in here to our flight plan in in Foreflight. We can hit edit, we can go to Navlog, we can go to profile. Everything that we want to know about our flight plan is easily available right here on the screen at all times. If I wanted to add a different waypoint, click insert before, whatever it is that I wanted to do. So all of that stuff is really handy. But here is something that Foreflight just, and this is only going to matter to people that actually fly instruments, but this is something that is invaluable to me, is that when I'm flying an instrument, let's say we're going to KOPN and I want to load in an approach. Well, in Garmin Pilot, I would just pull up the approach plate, and that's pretty much the end of what I can do. Where in Foreflight, I would actually come in and edit my flight plan, and I'm going to go to procedure. I'm going to tell it I'm going to run an approach. I'm going to tell it I'm going to fly the RNAV 30. It's going to ask which approach. So I'm coming from the north, so I'm going to go in at Hutzer. And so it loads, and then down here I just tell it to add to route. And you'll notice now when I go back to my nav log, I've got every single waypoint that I need to hit to get into that approach. And so if I close my flight plan up, I can actually see exactly how I am going to get to the airport before I ever get there. I've got my whole route loaded in here. Now, if we jump over here to Garmin Pilot, and we look at the same thing, so we've got our flight plan that's loaded here. And so right away, I'm sitting here saying, okay, well, how do I get to our flight plan? Well, we see it up here at the top, so we're going to click on our flight plan. And so I want to load in that approach plate. Well, I really can't. There's not really a way here for me to do that. I can add the waypoints in manually if I want to, But what you're really going to do is we're going to close our flight plan. We're going to open up our split map, and then from here I can actually load in the approach plate that I want to look at. So I just hit the little plate over here on the left or in the middle, and we're going to go to charts. And then once I'm in my charts, I can go in and I've got a list of all of the charts and things that I want to load. So it's not really overly complicated. It's just, you know, it's not nearly as nice as what I'm doing with Foreflight, because I've got more interaction with Foreflight. Now, in this particular case, if I wanted to, I can hit map up here and it'll throw the map, the chart over the map on the left. And then I can also click on this little guy here and we can go to synthetic vision on the right hand side. Again, if we go back over here to Foreflight, if I wanted to do the same thing, all I've got to do is hit the little synthetic vision icon and it brings it up there on the top. So synthetic vision in Foreflight is always one click away, where if I go back over here to Garmin Pilot, now assuming that we, you know, if we don't have the map split, which I don't normally fly with my map split in Foreflight either, but in Foreflight I click that one button and I've got my synthetic vision up, where here I've got to open this and then I've got to go in here and choose what I want to show on the right hand side of the page. So a couple extra steps, but not really a huge deal. So we'll close that. The other thing is, you know, Garmin's done a better job with their flight plan information. It's easier to work with this. It also is one click right there at the top to get to. If we go back over here to home, we do have a flight plan that we can get to there. We've got airport information. I don't know, I don't think that they have a way to favorite any of your airports. So the airports that you frequent, there really isn't any way to get to them or to remember what they are. So you can flight plan and look at recent, but there's just not any way to favorite the airports, which I don't really understand why they haven't fixed that yet. Also, if we look at the way that we are presented here, so let's go down here, we'll go to flight plan and we'll go to KOPM, which is the airport that we're going to be going to. So let's say we go to procedures, we've got all of our charts and stuff, we can go to weather, go to FBOs. This is something that has been this way forever, and I don't really understand it. I'm going to jump back over here to Foreflight just to kind of explain. So in Foreflight, I'm going to go to Thomaston. In Foreflight, if I hit FBOs up here, you'll notice that the system has got a nice clean view of every FBO on the field along with their gas prices. Normally, if I'm flying into an airport, I don't want to go to the one that has the most expensive gas. I'm usually going to go to the one that's the most fair. So that's what I want to see. Maybe I'm different. Maybe, you know, everybody else just wants to see a list of airport or of FBOs. But in my opinion, this view is very difficult to deal with. If I go into Jim's Aviation, for example, this gives me, you know, information about that particular FBO, but at that particular part of the airport, that's not even, like, for example, Rendrag. This is actually an avionics shop that's there. It's not an FBO. So there's only one FBO, which is the Thomaston Airport, and so I'm actually in Garmin Pilot, I'm having to sit here and click through all this to figure out what all this stuff is. If I want fuel prices, then I click on fuel prices. It gives me the information up here at the top for Thomaston. But again, if I have more than one FBO, I've got to go through and click on them to figure out what, you know, who's got the cheapest price. And then sometimes it won't even list the name of the place that has the thing. So sometimes it gets a little harder to figure out what FBO you want to go to get that price. So, you know, Garmin Pilot to me on the airport guide, the airport information is way behind on making this simple. And it's been like this for years. They've added some cool features to their system, but I don't understand why something this simple can't be fixed to make it a little bit easier to work with. So I still have a complaint with respect to that. If we go in, let's see what else I want to cover here. The weight and balance and logbook stuff, I'm not really going to touch on because they're fairly easy to work with on both applications. The checklist as well. So as far as the overall applications and using them, they're a little, Garmin still has the home that brings up the same kind of screen that you would see on your panel mounts inside of your airplane. So that can have, a benefit to having a kind of a similar interface, even though they aren't similar and they have different functions. But I still prefer the Foreflight view, having the one click to open and close the different instrument panels, having all of the bottom menu down here gives me all of the information that I want, plates or documents or airports or whatever it happens to be, with one click instead of having to hunt with it. Foreflight does, in my opinion, they need to do some work on their map with labels overriding each other, and also on their nearest airport function. They've got plenty of room up here at the top. It would be kind of nice if they'd add an icon for nearest that you could just click on and see it, and I didn't have to actually click and hold on the map while I'm flying to try to get to the nearest airports. But if you're flying IFR, at this point, I still think that, with the ability to add the approach plates and stuff in line in my flight plan, far outweighs anything that Garmin has to offer at this point, in that respect. If you're flying only VFR, then I think both of these applications are very, very similar. And if you're not flying a lot, then either one of them are going to serve the purpose perfectly well. I really, to be totally honest with you, the thing that always gets me going back to Garmin Pilot is the view. I think that their maps are much cleaner looking. They're cooler looking. So it's, I do love Garmin Pilot with their visual aspect. They just need to clean up their flight plan and a few other little things, and I think they're going to be pretty competitive in the whole market. I don't think that there is anything else that is really a big deal. Now, one thing, and I'm just going to mention this, you'll notice that I'm going to click in the top left-hand corner, and I'm going to drag to the right. You'll notice that the map, you'll notice the map is updating as I move, and you'll also notice there's no labels. You see right above the airport there is chopped in half where it hasn't refreshed. If I let go, it all comes back. If I go back over here to Foreflight and do the same thing, let me close this approach plate. If I do the same thing, you'll notice I don't get that refresh, and everything is updating as I move. So it's not having to wait for me to let go of my finger before it shows me what's over there. So the graphical portion of Foreflight is much more speedy and snappy than what you get off of Garmin Pilot. So that's one part of their map and stuff that's not all that good. But again, it's not that big of a deal, and it's not going to cause any problems, while you're flying. So it's not like it's noteworthy in any fashion other than just to compare them. I will say that if I go over here and I turn on Street View and I turn off the aeronautical, you'll notice here as I zoom in, I've got the roads and the other things that we have. If we go back over here to Garmin Pilot, now they have always had this Street View in here. They've now renamed it to OpenStreetMap, and so if we go to OpenStreetMap, they've actually added the ability to drill into those roads and to get to some of that information as well. So I don't think that it is as good as what Foreflight has. As you can see, I'm kind of zoomed in here and don't have, let me get back out here to where we were. So somewhere in here. So I'm just to the right of where 62 Golf Alpha is. So if I come back over here, there's 62 Golf Alpha, or I'm sorry, I was to the left. But you'll notice here I've got a lot more detail on the maps, the roads, the names of the roads. So you know, even now, even though I will give them kudos for actually having it, because they haven't had it in here before, it's still missing a lot of data. As you can see, I've zoomed in here and I have no idea what the name of half these roads are, where in Foreflight you actually do have that information. So they're getting better, but I still think at this particular point in the game, Foreflight is by far I won't say by far, they are the better app to have, just because of some of these small features. Again, depending on how much you fly and whether you're flying IFR or VFR, it really isn't going to matter at the end of the day which one of these maps you pick. I will mention that, you know, before you discard me saying anything about the street map, what I use that for is if I go on a trip and I want to try to figure out where a hotel is or where, you know, a customer site is based on where I'm going to be landing, so I can figure out what airport I want to land at, I use the street map to identify where they're at, and then I'll find the closest airport to that location. So I actually do use the street map stuff quite a bit when I'm in the planning stages of my trips. So it is a useful feature to have in there. So that's all I can think of at this point. If anybody has any other things that they would like for me to compare, you can put some comments in the boxes below, and I may come back and take a look at it.